The morning sun poured through the lace curtains of Ivy Carter's childhood bedroom, casting delicate shadows that danced across the faded floral wallpaper. The room hadn't changed in years. Her mother had preserved it like a shrine. Every book still alphabetized on the shelf, every porcelain figurine dusted, every Mother's Day card Ivy had ever made tucked neatly into a ribbon-tied bundle in the dresser drawer. It was her first Mother's Day without her. The silence in the house was oppressive. No hum of hummingbirds outside the kitchen window. No clinking of ceramic mugs as her mother prepared peppermint tea. Just the low groan of old wood settling, as if the house itself mourned along with her. While rummaging through a box of scarves and photo albums in the attic, Ivy's fingers brushed against something cold and rectangular. She pulled it out, a dusty old cassette tape in a plastic case, labeled in her mother's delicate handwriting, "For when I'm gone." Her breath hitched. The ink was slightly smudged, as if her mother's hand had trembled while writing it. Curiosity warred with dread. She took the tape downstairs, unearthed her old Walkman from a junk drawer, and popped the cassette in. The gears clicked. A low whir. Then, her mother's voice filled her ears, gentle, melodic, and achingly familiar. "Hello, sweetheart," the voice said, calm and clear, as though no time had passed. "If you're listening to this, then I'm no longer with you. But there are things I need you to know. Things I couldn't say when I was alive." Tears welled in Ivy's eyes. She pressed her palm to her chest. "Mom," the voice continued, shifting into something more deliberate, almost rehearsed. "You've always trusted too easily, my darling. Remember what I used to say. Trust is a flower that wilts under too much sun. Not everyone who smiles at you means you well." Ivy's brows furrowed. That phrase? It had always sounded poetic when her mother said it, a gentle reminder to be cautious. But now, spoken here, in this context, it chilled her. Her mother's tone wasn't sentimental. It was a warning. Then, silence. Ivy rewound the tape and listened again. The message was short, barely a minute long. No goodbye. No, I love you. Just that single cryptic mantra, delivered with unsettling clarity. What had she meant? Why this phrase? And why leave it buried in the attic like a secret begging to be found? As Ivy sat alone with her thoughts, the cassette in her lap and the weight of her mother's words pressing in like fog, one thing was suddenly clear. This Mother's Day wasn't about memories. It was about unraveling something her mother had hidden, and the unraveling had just begun. The next morning, Ivy woke with her mother's voice still echoing in her ears. Trust is a flower that wilts under too much sun. It clung to her like a second skin, familiar yet suddenly foreign. She couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something more, something deliberate. While making tea in the kitchen, her mother's favorite blend of rosehip and chamomile, her eyes fell on the dusty sewing box perched high on the pantry shelf. A place her mother always guarded, always claimed was too full of needles to be safe. Ivy had never questioned it, but now, with her mother's cassette fresh in her mind, the excuse seemed more like a deflection. She pulled the wooden box down. Its hinges creaked as it opened, revealing spools of thread arranged by color, neat little bundles of embroidery floss, and an old tape measure curled like a sleeping snake. Everything was in order, too much so. Ivy ran her fingers along the velvet lining of the bottom compartment, then paused. The base felt uneven. She dug at the lining until her nail caught a seam that wasn't quite right. With a gentle tug, the false bottom lifted, revealing a hidden space beneath. Inside, a yellowed envelope worn thin at the edges and a photograph. Heart thudding, Ivy pulled the photo into the light. It was instantly familiar. Her mother's handwriting scrawled on the back read, "My two sons, 1993. The image showed a much younger Ivy, no older than 2, sitting on a patchwork quilt with another little girl beside her. They were both dressed in matching pastel dresses, their dark curls wild in the breeze. Ivy remembered that quilt. It was still in the cedar chest upstairs. But the girl next to her, her smile radiant, her eyes almost identical to Ivy's, was a complete stranger. Ivy stared at the picture, a creeping sensation crawling over her skin. Her stomach twisted. 2 sons? Her mother had always called her Sunshine. It had been their nickname, their thing. Was this girl her sister? And if so, why had her mother never mentioned her? The envelope trembled in Ivy's hand as she opened it. Inside was nothing but a brittle slip of notepaper. The ink faded almost to invisibility. It read simply, "Some stitches were never meant to hold." The cryptic message, the photo, the secret compartment. Ivy sat back on the tiled floor, the box between her knees, trying to catch her breath. It felt like the air had thickened around her, like the house itself had just shifted beneath her feet. Her mother had always said sewing taught patience, taught care. But Ivy was starting to wonder if the real lesson was this: hide what must never unravel. She looked again at the little girl's face. Those eyes, so much like her own. Who was this second son? And why had her light been hidden? The mantra wouldn't leave her alone. Stitches hold more than seams. It had always sounded like one of her mother's comforting little idioms, something harmless muttered while mending a hem or patching a beloved quilt. But now Ivy heard it differently, like a clue, like a warning sewn into the very fabric of her childhood. She wandered the house, mantra on loop in her head, searching for something, anything, that felt out of place. Her mother had been meticulous, but also sentimental. She didn't just keep things, she hid them. She layered her world with meanings that often seemed poetic at the time but now felt like veils over truths Ivy had never thought to question. In the hallway outside her childhood bedroom, Ivy paused in front of the old family portrait wall. The wallpaper here was slightly bubbled in a single vertical strip, something she'd never noticed before. The edges of the paper curled ever so slightly, and the seam along the wooden molding was just misaligned enough to catch the eye now that she was really looking. Heart racing, Ivy fetched a letter opener from her father's desk drawer and gently slid it beneath the wallpaper. It peeled back with a hiss, revealing something more solid beneath, a wood-paneled wall with a faint outline, too perfectly rectangular to be random. She pressed. Click. A narrow compartment popped open, revealing a shallow drawer. Inside, wrapped in lace-trimmed handkerchiefs, were 3 things: a rusted key, a jagged fragment of what looked like a birth certificate, torn just below where a second name might have been written, a small note in her mother's hand. Even patterns lie when stitched by fear. Ivy stared at the fragment. Her name, Ivy Celeste Carter, was there, typed neatly. But the space below, where a sibling's name might have gone, had been ripped clean through. The paper ended abruptly under a line marked, "Twins, YN." She closed her eyes and took a breath, steadying herself. The key, the slip of paper, the hidden compartment. This wasn't grief driving her anymore. This was a mystery her mother had meant her to solve. The sayings, the cassette, the photo, it was all connected. Her childhood hadn't been shaped by random bits of wisdom. It had been mapped, stitched together like a quilt meant to cover something dangerous beneath. She retraced her steps to the attic, the one place she hadn't gone yet. Her mother used to sew up there when she wanted space to think. The door creaked as she turned the knob and stepped into the dusty quiet. Stacks of fabric, spools, and half-finished garments surrounded her like ghosts. Then she saw it. An old steamer trunk tucked beneath the window seat, its brass lock dulled with age. The rusted key fit perfectly. Inside, more fabric, a stuffed toy she remembered from toddlerhood, and beneath it another manila envelope. This one was heavier. Inside, hospital records, a diagram of the Carter home, and another mantra scribbled across the front in her mother's looping cursive. Some truths must be unpicked one stitch at a time. Ivy sat back on her heels. Her mother had turned their home into a puzzle box, and Ivy was beginning to fear what she'd find at its center. The photo haunted her. My 2 sons, 1993. It sat on the edge of Ivy's kitchen table like it had weight. More than a photograph, more than memory. Her face was unmistakable, cheeks round and smiling in the sunlight. But the girl beside her? A shadow. The same age. The same chin. Eyes too familiar to dismiss as coincidence. Who was she? Ivy couldn't bring herself to ask her father. Not yet. He had grown brittle in his grief, clinging to routine like it was all that held him together. He wouldn't handle questions. Not these kinds of questions. So she turned to the only person who might have answers, and no need to sugarcoat them. Aunt Maureen. Maureen had drifted in and out of their lives like smoke, her mother's only sister, a wild spirit who had never settled down, never had children, and never stayed in town for long. Ivy hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. She wasn't even sure Maureen came to the funeral. Finding her wasn't easy. The address Ivy finally tracked down was a weathered cottage outside of Belmere Hollow, half swallowed by ivy and wood smoke. Appropriate, she thought grimly. Maureen opened the door like she'd been expecting her. "Ivy," she said softly, her voice a rasp soaked in bourbon and thyme. I wondered how long it would take. Inside, the house smelled like lavender and old secrets. Books lined every surface. A cat watched Ivy from atop a bookshelf, its tail twitching. Maureen poured tea without asking if Ivy wanted any. Then she saw the photo. Her hand trembled. "You found that, did you?" Maureen whispered, sinking into a frayed armchair. "She kept it? After all these years?" Ivy didn't answer. She just waited. Maureen stared into her cup, then back at the photograph. "She called you her sunshine. Both of you, my two sons. You were born minutes apart, but only one of you came home." A chill wrapped around Ivy's spine. "There was another baby?" she asked, her voice barely holding steady. Maureen looked at her, eyes shining with something between regret and fear. "There was, and there wasn't. It's not my story to tell. Not fully. Your mother, she made choices. Ones that split this family down the middle." Ivy pulled out the torn birth certificate. "Why was this hidden in the wall? Why all the riddles?" Maureen hesitated. "Because your mother lived in a kind of fear most women never admit to. Not of danger, but of exposure. There were things about your birth, Ivy, things that weren't straightforward. And she couldn't let the truth come out. Not then. Not while he was still around." "Who?" "She never named him. Just said, 'He can't know. He must never know.'" Maureen rose, crossed to a cluttered drawer, and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "I kept this," she said, handing it over. "She asked me to destroy it. I never did." Inside was a second photograph, this time of her mother, visibly pregnant, standing with a man whose face had been half torn from the image. Ivy's heart raced. "Who was he?" "Your real father, I think," Maureen murmured. "But again, not my story to finish." Ivy looked at the photo again, then the one of her and the mystery girl. "She had a name, didn't she?" Ivy asked. "The other baby?" Maureen nodded, but her lips quivered. "We weren't allowed to say it, not in that house. Your mother made sure of that. But you remember." A long silence passed. Finally, Maureen whispered, "Lila." And just like that, the name settled into Ivy's bones, foreign and familiar all at once. Lila. A sister, a ghost, a forgotten son. And Ivy knew this wasn't just her mother's story anymore. It was hers to finish. The music box had always been her mother's favorite keepsake. Dainty, porcelain, painted with violets and faded gold trim. As a child, Ivy used to wind it up just to hear the soft lullaby spill from its cracked melody. It sat untouched for years on the bedroom shelf, too delicate to toss, too sentimental to dust. Now it felt like a time bomb, still reeling from Aunt Maureen's confession, and the name Lila Ivy clutched the box tighter, her breath shallow as she turned the tiny key. The tune chimed once, twice, then stuttered. The mechanism had jammed. Instinctively, she flipped it over. The velvet lining on the bottom was peeled at one corner. That's when she saw it. A small rectangular slit, barely big enough to notice. Heart thudding, Ivy pried it open. Inside was a bundle of folded papers, yellowed with age, and sealed with a faded red ribbon. Her hands trembled as she untied the knot. What spilled out weren't just notes, they were love letters. The first one was dated July 1992. "You smelled like lavender and rain. I should have turned around and left right then. But I didn't. I stayed, and now I can't stop picturing a life that doesn't belong to me." Ivy sat on the floor, the music box forgotten, as she read one letter after another. They weren't written by her father, at least not the man who raised her. These were from someone else, someone poetic, passionate, and deeply troubled. Each letter spoke of secrecy, longing, and impossible choices. Ivy's mother had written back, her replies laced with equal parts desire and dread. "They'll never forgive me if they find out. I don't even know what's real anymore. But I know this. You are the only thing that's ever made me feel alive." One envelope was different. Inside was a Polaroid, grainy, dimly lit. Her mother, laughing beside a man with dark skin and a trumpet slung over his shoulder. Ivy's breath caught. She didn't recognize him, but something about his smile stirred something in her gut. At the bottom of the photo was a scrawl. "The last summer, before everything changed. E." Ivy turned to the final letter. This one was unfinished. Words trailed off mid-sentence, ink smudged. "If something happens, if I vanish like the music does when the box shuts, just know she'll never know the truth. Unless she listens closely. That's the only way." It was unsigned. Ivy's skin prickled. She remembered her mother's voice on the cassette. "Trust is a flower that wilts under too much sun." How many of her mother's little mantras had been coded whispers? Suddenly, Ivy wasn't sure if these letters were love or confession. Who was this man? What had happened to him? And what exactly had her mother been hiding behind her perfectly pressed aprons and tea-stained advice? In that moment, the woman Ivy had grieved no longer felt like the mother she thought she knew. She felt like a stranger with secrets, and Ivy had just opened the floodgates. The results were in. Ivy had stared at the letter for an hour before even daring to open it. The envelope felt heavier than it should, as though the words inside could pull her under. But she needed to know. She had to know. Her mother's secrets were slowly unraveling, and the final stitch had yet to be pulled. She slid the paper out, her hands trembling. She already knew what the words would say, even before she saw them. The DNA test. It was supposed to confirm her suspicions. If there was a shred of doubt left in her mind, it was gone now. Her father was not her biological father. There, in black and white, was the confirmation. The name of the man who had raised her, Robert Carter, was absent from the list of genetic markers. Instead, there was a name Ivy had never seen before. Frankie Harris. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The letters her mother had hidden, the cryptic phrases, the faces in old photographs. Suddenly, everything was falling into place. The jazz musician. The man in the Polaroid with her mother. Frankie Harris. The real father. Ivy's breath caught in her throat. She tried to steady herself, but the room felt as though it were closing in. A swell of emotions, grief, rage, confusion, pulsed beneath her skin. She had always wondered, always felt something missing, a sense that the man who had raised her wasn't the one who had made her who she was. But this was something else. The document was clear. Frankie Harris had vanished. No record of him for years. He was as much a ghost as the shadow she'd been chasing all these days. Why hadn't her mother told her? And what had happened to him? Ivy sat in her mother's old chair, the one by the window where she used to sit and watch the birds. Her eyes darted to the shelf where the photo album sat, forgotten, dusty. Her mother had kept everything. She had preserved moments, memories, but hidden others, like a dark corner she was too afraid to look into. There was something deeply unsettling about this. Not just the truth that her real father had been erased, but that her mother had lived with this secret for so long. How could she have built a family, a life with Robert Carter, while holding such a crucial lie? Her mother's words from the cassette echoed in her mind. "If something happens, if I vanish like the music does when the box shuts, just know she'll never know the truth. Unless she listens closely." Had her mother always known this day would come? Had she always expected Ivy to find this truth? Was it a secret Ivy was meant to carry alone? The questions piled up until Ivy couldn't breathe. With shaking hands, she dialed the number she'd been dreading but knew she had to call. The number on the last love letter. The number connected to Frankie Harris. It rang once, twice. Then a voice, rough and distant, answered. Yeah? It was gruff, like he'd been waiting, like he knew she would call. Ivy Carter, she said, forcing the words out. I think you knew my mother. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. A breath. A shift. I'm sorry, who is this? The man asked, his voice shaking now. I'm your daughter. There was another silence. Ivy heard his breath, ragged now. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Then, more firmly, where are you? I'm coming to find you, Ivy replied, her voice a blend of resolve and desperation. She knew now that she couldn't stop. She couldn't turn back from this. Her mother's voice had led her this far. The clues. The mantras. The letters. Now, Ivy would have to confront the most painful truth of all. Her mother had lived a secret life, and her real father was out there, waiting, hiding, and possibly still carrying the weight of the same love that had once been too dangerous to speak. As Ivy hung up the phone, the silence around her felt heavier than ever. The man she had always known as her father wasn't her father at all. The man she had longed for, whose letters filled her mother's secret box, was the key to the past that would unlock everything. And Ivy was going to find him, no matter the cost. The hospital discharge forms sat in front of Ivy, still warm from the printer. They were the kind of documents her mother would have locked away in the back of a drawer, never meant to see the light of day. Yet here they were, proof, undeniable and stark. Ivy's fingers hovered over the papers, her breath shallow, as though the very air had grown heavier with every fact she uncovered. One record caught her eye immediately, a listing for Ivy's birth, but with another name below it, Baby B, marked with a faint red stamp that read, Adoption Pending. It felt like an ice cube had been dropped into her chest. Ivy had always assumed she was the only child, the apple of her mother's eye. But the name on the paper, alongside her own, told a different story. A story her mother had kept buried, hidden behind layers of mantras and lies. There was no mistaking it. Her mother had left the hospital with 2 babies, not one. But where was the other child? And why had her mother never spoken of her? Ivy's mind raced as she rifled through more papers in the folder, copies of adoption forms, hospital release records, and letters. Among the documents was a hastily written note from her mother, scribbled in a shaky hand on the back of a receipt. She'll be better off. Let it go, Ivy. The past is too dangerous to carry. Ivy's stomach twisted. She wasn't sure what was more chilling, the fact that her mother had written those words or the implication of what they meant. A child, her twin, had been given away, sent somewhere Ivy couldn't even fathom. The betrayal sunk deep. The woman who had held her hand through everything, taught her about love, loyalty, and trust, had erased this other child from existence. Ivy thought about the woman in the photograph, the one who shared her mother's secrets, the woman she had yet to meet. Her sister. She was out there somewhere, someone Ivy had never known, and yet everything about her felt connected to Ivy's own identity. Had she always been living in the shadow of a sister she never knew? A sister who had been given up, abandoned before Ivy even had the chance to understand. The truth about her real father had hit Ivy like a freight train. But this, the existence of another daughter, was even harder to absorb. What kind of mother could do that? Keep a child, raise one, and then, without a second thought, give away the other? As Ivy paced around her mother's living room, the silence was deafening. There was no one left to ask. No one but Aunt Maureen, who had already shared so much with Ivy, and yet there were still questions left unanswered. Questions Ivy knew she would need to ask again. Suddenly, Ivy felt a stirring of determination. She wasn't going to let this go. She had to find this woman. She had to know who she was. Her twin sister wasn't just a figure in some distant past, a shadow on paper. She was a real person, and Ivy had to know the truth. With renewed resolve, Ivy picked up her phone, her fingers cold as she dialed Maureen's number. The call rang twice before Maureen's familiar voice answered. "Ivy? What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I need to know more. You mentioned there was another baby. The records say my mother left with two of us. What happened to her?" Maureen fell silent for a long moment, and Ivy could hear the faint sound of her shifting in her chair. "I told you everything I know, Ivy. Your mother, she made me promise, she made me swear to never speak of it again. But I have to know." Ivy's voice cracked, raw with emotion. "I have to know what happened. I need to know who she is." There was another pause, but this time, Maureen didn't hesitate. "I know you think this is all about some missing piece of your life, Ivy, but the truth, it's not that simple. Your mother made a choice, and she made it clear that she didn't want you to be part of that decision. I don't care about her decision anymore. I want to know where she is. I want to know if she's alive, if she's okay. I have to find her, Aunt Maureen. I need to." The line went dead silent. "I'll help you," Maureen said finally. "But be careful. She's not like you. She's not what you think." Ivy's pulse quickened. Her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. She wasn't sure what Maureen meant by that cryptic statement, but it only pushed her forward. It was time to find her sister. Ivy wasn't sure how she would do it yet, but she would find her twin. The idea of being a part of something larger than herself, of uncovering a hidden truth that tied her to another person in such a profound way, gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. Now, the path was clear. The truth would set them both free, or destroy everything she thought she knew. Ivy sat in her mother's study, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of old books. The house had been eerily quiet ever since Ivy returned from her visit with Aunt Maureen, and for the first time, Ivy felt truly alone in this house she had once known so well. Every corner seemed to hold a secret, and the walls, once filled with comfort, now felt oppressive, as if they too were closing in on her. In front of her lay the second cassette tape, identical to the first in its simple design. There was no label, no title, just the same scratched-up plastic that had once held her mother's voice. This time, Ivy's fingers trembled as she inserted the tape into the old player. Her heart pounded in anticipation. She had thought the first tape was unsettling, but nothing could prepare her for what this one would reveal. The first one had been filled with cryptic messages and old wisdom. But this felt different. There was a strange heaviness to the air as the tape hissed to life. Her mother's voice crackled through the speakers, distant and familiar, but laced with something darker, something more desperate than Ivy had ever heard before. "Ivy, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and there's so much you still don't know." The words were soft, measured, as though her mother had taken great care in choosing each one. Ivy leaned in closer, her breath caught in her throat. "You think you know everything about me," her mother continued. "You think you understand the woman I was. But Ivy, there's so much more, a part of me that you will never understand unless you listen carefully." Ivy's stomach twisted. Her mind raced, replaying her mother's words over and over. Had she known that Ivy would uncover this? Had she expected her to search this deeply into her past? The eerie calm in her voice suggested that her mother had anticipated everything, that this was a part of some plan Ivy hadn't fully understood yet. Her mother's voice grew darker, the words becoming more urgent. "Your sister, Ivy, she's dangerous. She's not what you think. Don't trust her, no matter how much she may seem like you. You're not the same. You were never meant to be. I made a mistake, a terrible, horrible mistake, and now I'm paying for it." Ivy's heart skipped a beat. Her mother was talking about Lila, the sister she hadn't even met yet, the one her mother had hidden away. Ivy had been searching for her sister, desperate to understand her, but now her mother was warning her that the sister she had been so eager to find was dangerous. The tape crackled again, the voice flickering with static. "I had no choice, Ivy. I did what I thought was right, and now I can't undo it. She's like me, but not. She's got a fire inside her that I couldn't control, that no one could. And she will do anything to get what she wants. You'll see it soon enough. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The tape hissed, then went silent. For a long moment, Ivy sat motionless, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. Her mother's voice, once a source of comfort and wisdom, now felt like a chain wrapped tightly around her heart, constricting with every new revelation. What had her mother meant by dangerous? What could Lila have done to make her mother so fearful of her? Ivy's mind flashed back to the records she had found earlier. The adoption papers, the hospital documents showing that her mother had left with 2 children. There had been no mention of why Ivy's sister had been given up, or of the reasons behind it. But now it was clear that there was something about Lila that had terrified their mother. The tape ended with a click, and the silence returned, even more suffocating than before. Ivy's fingers hovered over the rewind button, but she couldn't bring herself to press it. The idea of hearing her mother's voice again, especially after those last words, felt wrong, too final, too haunting. She had already heard enough. Her mother had made a terrible mistake. What did that mean for Ivy? Was finding Lila the right choice? Or had her mother been right all along? Ivy felt a growing sense of dread settle in her chest. It was one thing to search for answers, to uncover the truth. But now, the truth had become a threat, a thing that could destroy everything Ivy had known and believed in. She had to find her sister. But how could she, knowing now that her mother had so strongly warned her against it? Was it possible that Lila, her twin, the one person who had shared her very being from the start, could really be so different from her? Could Ivy really trust her? Ivy stared at the cassette player for a long time, trying to process everything. Her mind was a swirl of conflicting emotions, anger at her mother for keeping such a crucial secret, fear of the unknown, and a deep, aching longing to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Ivy's gaze fell on the music box she had found earlier, the one filled with letters and the final confession from her mother. It seemed like a lifetime ago that she had discovered the first piece of her mother's past. But this was different. This wasn't just another secret. This was a warning. A warning that Ivy wasn't sure she could ignore. With a sigh, Ivy stood and walked to the window, staring out at the streets beyond. The world felt larger now, more dangerous, yet somehow more connected. There was a woman out there, a woman who shared her blood, her history, and Ivy was going to find her. She wasn't sure what she'd find when she did. But she knew that, for better or worse, she couldn't stop now. Ivy was about to step into a world of untold secrets, secrets that could destroy her family forever, or reveal the truth she had always needed to hear. And she had no idea which one she was about to face. The air was thick with tension as Ivy drove toward the address she had tracked down. The coordinates had been painstakingly pieced together from her mother's cryptic messages, and now, each mile felt like a drumbeat pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect when she finally came face to face with Lila, her sister, the one she had been searching for in a haze of confusion and desperation. As Ivy turned the corner and saw the house in front of her, her breath hitched. It wasn't anything like she had imagined. It wasn't the humble cottage or the cozy little home she'd pictured when she thought of her long-lost sibling. It was a large, old Victorian house, slightly run down but with an undeniable elegance. Ivy felt a pang of unease ripple through her. This house was not the place of a woman who had been forgotten. It looked like a place where secrets had been carefully curated, guarded by time and distance. A home, perhaps, built on more than just bricks and mortar. It was a house of hidden things. Ivy parked the car and took a deep breath, the weight of the moment crashing over her. She had spent so much time trying to imagine what this encounter would be like, but now that she was here, her mind was empty, her heart conflicted. What would Lila be like? Would she look like Ivy? Would she be the same as the girl in the photos, or would the years have twisted her into something Ivy didn't recognize? When Ivy knocked on the door, the sound echoed through the house. There was no immediate answer, and Ivy hesitated, unsure whether she should just leave. But before she could turn away, the door creaked open, and a woman appeared. Lila. Her face was unreadable, but Ivy could see the resemblance immediately. Lila's eyes were the same shade of green as hers, and her dark hair cascaded in waves, just like Ivy's had when she was younger. But there was something colder about Lila, a hardness in her gaze that Ivy couldn't ignore. Lila studied Ivy for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice low and cautious. "You came," she said, almost as if the words were both a statement and a question. I had to," Ivy replied, her voice trembling with a mix of uncertainty and determination. She couldn't let herself back away now, no matter how unsettled she felt. "You're my sister." Lila didn't flinch at the word. She didn't smile either. Instead, her lips tightened into a thin line as she stepped back from the door and motioned for Ivy to come inside. "Come in, then." Ivy stepped across the threshold, the weight of the house closing in around her. The walls, lined with antique furniture and old paintings, made the air feel even heavier. It was clear that this place held many stories, but Ivy wasn't sure how much of it was hers. Lila led Ivy to the living room, where they both sat in silence. Ivy couldn't help but study Lila more closely now, trying to decipher the woman sitting across from her. There was a quiet intensity in the way she carried herself, a subtle unease in her movements that Ivy recognized all too well. It was the same unease Ivy had felt when she'd first started uncovering the secrets of her family. The difference was, Lila had been living with it for years. "I don't know what you're expecting," Lila said after a long silence, her voice soft but tinged with something sharp. "But it's not going to be what you want. I'm not the person you've been looking for." Ivy frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean. She paused, trying to find the right words, but her emotions were tangled. "I've been searching for you, Lila. For so long, I didn't even know you existed, but I had to know. I need to understand." Lila's gaze flickered, and for the briefest moment, Ivy saw something like pain flash in her eyes. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by a cold mask. "I'm sure you do. But trust me, Ivy, there's nothing you want to understand about me, nothing about my life that's worth knowing. It's better if you walk away now, before you ruin everything." Ivy was taken aback by the words. She had expected anger, maybe resentment, but this was different. This was defeat. "What happened to you? Why didn't Mom ever tell me about you?" Ivy's voice cracked on the last word, and she immediately regretted the rawness of her emotion. Lila's eyes softened for a brief second, then hardened again. She leaned forward slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the armchair. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The truth? Fine. Your mother didn't tell you about me because she couldn't. Because she knew what I would do to your perfect little life if you ever found out. She knew what I would destroy." Ivy recoiled, her heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" Lila's gaze flickered to the floor for a moment before meeting Ivy's eyes with an intensity that almost took Ivy's breath away. "I wasn't supposed to exist, not in her world, not in the one she built for you. But I did, and when I was born, things got messy. Your mother made sure you got the good life, the life she thought you deserved, and I got what was left. A different life, one full of things she didn't want you to know about. She told me to stay away from you, to stay hidden. And I've done that, until now." Ivy felt like the floor had been pulled out from beneath her. Her mother had hidden her away. She'd hidden Lila from her, from the world. All these years, Ivy had believed her life was a result of fate, or chance, something so clearly defined, but Lila's words shattered that illusion. She wasn't just another forgotten child. She was the shadow of Ivy's existence, the one who had never been given the same chance. "Why now?" Ivy whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of it all. "Why are you here, Lila? Why have you come to me now after all these years?" Lila's lips curled into a bitter smile, but her eyes were dark. "Because you finally found me, and you're about to learn the truth, whether you like it or not." The house was silent when Ivy returned. Not the comforting kind of silence, but the kind that echoes, like a space hollowed out by truth too heavy to speak aloud. In her hand, she clutched the final key, her mother's locket. It was smaller than she remembered, warm from being held, its filigree edges worn smooth by time and worry. She sat alone in the dim light of the study, the cassette tapes, torn papers, and old photographs scattered around her like puzzle pieces that didn't want to fit. Her hands trembled as she opened the locket. Inside, instead of the expected picture, there was a tightly folded scrap of paper. Ivy unfolded it slowly, her breath shallow. In her mother's familiar handwriting, barely legible with age, were 7 words. Love is the greatest lie we tell to protect the truth. Ivy read it again and again, the words slicing through her like a blade. Her mother's final mantra. Everything she thought she knew about love, her parents' marriage, her childhood, even her own reflection, was now tainted by that phrase. Love, the very thing that had soothed her when she scraped her knees or cried in the dark, was now the mask her mother had worn to hide the truth. And the truth had claws. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever. Ivy reached for the tape player one last time and slid in the second cassette, the one her mother had tried to erase, the one that had been hastily taped back together. The warbled voice returned, gentler this time, more human, more afraid. Ivy, if you're hearing this, then you found her, or she's found you. A long pause, a shaky inhale. I tried to keep you safe. I tried to keep her safe. But love made me a coward. I thought I could protect you both by choosing one of you. I told myself that was love. But the truth is, I abandoned a part of myself, and I let you both grow up with lies. The voice cracked, fragile and honest. If you find her, be careful. She carries my rage, my regret, the things I buried when I chose comfort over courage. She is what I could never face, and I don't know what she'll do now that you've pulled her back into the light. Silence. Then, softly like a whisper, I love you. I'm sorry that was never enough. The tape clicked off. Ivy closed her eyes, her throat tight with emotion. The question now was no longer what happened, but what will I do with what I know? Upstairs, in her mother's old bedroom, she found the final box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were court documents, hospital release forms, and a letter addressed only to my legacy. It confirmed the last of it. Lila was never officially adopted. She had been handed over quietly, without paperwork, to a woman paid to disappear. Her entire life had been an erasure. Ivy stared at the fireplace, the documents in one hand, the locket in the other. She could burn it all, wipe the slate clean, let the dead stay buried. No one would question her. She could walk away and keep her life, keep her identity, keep the illusion her mother worked so hard to preserve. Or she could share it, expose the truth, risk Lila's vengeance, the family shame, and the unraveling of everything that had once felt safe. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lila. Well? What now, sister? Ivy looked down at the final mantra again. Love is the greatest lie we tell to protect the truth. And then, for the first time in days, she smiled. Not because she had found peace, but because she finally understood. Love hadn't been a lie. It had simply been incomplete.